Yeah, what's good, Joe? Shaman the Bigga P, and I'm here to share my thoughts on the Showtime tripleheader that just happened. I just finished a couple, maybe an hour and a half ago. Uh, it was a decent card, and finally we got a Fight of the Year candidate out of it. A definite Fight of the Year candidate, not one where I'm gonna watch and say wow, and then a month later forget about it. It was an incredible fight. The first one to open up was Omar Figueroa versus Belmontes. This was Figueroa's first fight after that war he had with Arakawa, and before, most people were wondering, how much did it take out of both of them. Well, Arakawa came back and pretty much looked the way he did, except last month or so, and he looked the way he did, but he didn't really take, it wasn't as violent as that fight. But the big question was for Figueroa was, now, did his hands recover from that fight? Because he landed probably an insane amount of punches on Arakawa, and to the point where he broke both of his hands. So that was the big question. I think the fight was also postponed because of a hand injury, because he was supposed to be on the Canelo card, facing Canelo's brother. Um, which that didn't happen because of his hand injury. So this was his first fight back, and I have to say it was less than stellar. The big knock against Omar is he has power. He has plenty of power. That's what it is. He pretty much relied on his power. And in our color fight, it was to the point where he made it a lot harder on himself by slugging instead of boxing the man, which made for a great fight. But it took a toll on it took a serious toll on his hands, and it looked like and I personally don't think they ever fully recovered. Because pretty much the whole fight, he didn't have anything on his hands. He didn't have anything on his punches, no zip or anything. Um, and it didn't help that Belmontes, although he had a 19-3 record with 5 KOs, it didn't really help that he wasn't in the mood to engage. And what he was doing was, boxing pretty much Omar soundly. Um, his head movement was outstanding. He was catching him with the counters and everything. And this was probably in the first half of the fight. But what made this fight close is nothing that Omar did, because Omar was just really just walking forward and trying to land something. He showed no movement. He didn't show anything. He didn't want to box. He wanted to try to punch the guy out. But what made that fight closer than what it should have was Belmonte's dropping his output rate, and I think that's mostly in a fight like that where challengers coming to take the title. I know something. Although he was landing the cleaner, effective punches, the fact that he wasn't throwing. I mean, the movement and everything, it's nice. It's definitely nice. But if you're doing that and you're not hitting back, then it's kind of negating what you're doing. Even still, I was still giving Belmonte those rounds. But I knew in my heart that watching this, I know the judges unless he actually scored a knockdown or something along the way, the judges were not gonna see it the same way I did. And for a minute, and then so when the fight ended and they read the scores, like the first, I mean, it was split for, one was for Belmontes, one was for Figueroa. But when I read that 118-110 card, I already knew what time it was. I already knew, because I was like, if it's gonna be that wide, that obviously wide, then I know it was gonna go to Omar, and which it did. I mean, I'll give credit. I mean, it was Omar's first fight back since the hand injury, and clearly his hands were sore. His hands were still bothering him, although he said in the post interview nothing was hurt. But Omar was in a situation before where and this is another situation where if Omar actually faced someone with more conviction in his punches, because Belmonte did manage to still bloody him up. If he faced, if he still faced, if he faced someone with a little bit more pop in their punches, Omar would have probably been in serious trouble. Again, and this was a knock against him. Omar needs to box. You can't just go. I mean, you can't. Yes, you can. You can slug, but you can't just do that all the time. You got to have a plan B, and if you keep on slugging, you know. And he was just confused. Like he didn't cut off the ring, lateral movement, everything was just. He was just confused by it. I felt for Belmontes in a way because, like I said, it was closer more or less because what he did negatively. He wasn't throwing enough. But even then, I still thought Belmonte still pulled off the win. I mean, I still thought he won by at least a couple rounds because they were close on that. I admit some of those rounds were close because it depended on how you wanted to score it. Do you either score the effective shots but the lessening output, or do you do Omar's activity but very ineffective offense and little to no defense? Um, so I mean, Omar, he retains his title, and Belmontes. I was impressed by Belmontes. One thing that I hope he takes away from the fight is, yes, it's. I mean, he was boxing great, but you got to throw back. You got to throw back in order to. You got to actually show some offense in order to take the title from the challenger. Um, so that's pretty much my thoughts on that. My thoughts on that fight. The second fight would be Lucas Matthysse versus John Molina. Lucas Matthysse making his first appearance since that fight with Danny Garcia back at the one pay-per-view, where, of course, where he lost a close fight, but in the process he suffered an orbital bone break. So that's why he was out for as long as he was. So pretty much it was wanting to see what he had left, and then we have Molina, who, who's known for his comeback KOs, most likely taking Hank Lundy and then John and then Mickey Bay, but then he also has that one loss where he's known for one loss where Tony DeMarco stopped him within 45 seconds of the first round, in his to date I think his only title shot. So again, I was expecting a complete, like the Figueroa-Belmontes fight, I was expecting a mismatch, and what we got was an absolute classic. I think after probably like the first 4 rounds, I didn't even bother scoring. I just sat back and I watched a Molina dial up 2 knockdowns. Although the second knockdown he dialed up on Lucas, that one was not. I think that one wasn't in the back of the head. It wasn't as legit, but what can you do? I mean, that's what he called it, and I was shocked too because I honestly didn't think Molina could actually hurt Lucas, but he was hurting him. Right from the first round, they were just tearing into each other. I'm talking about knocking lumps of stuff, like knocking lumps off each other. It just got brutal and it got bloodier. Headbutt opened up a cut over Lucas's eye, and then Molina looked like he got shot in the head. He had a wound behind his ear. The blood was pouring down his back. It was just the shots they were laying on each other were ridiculous. And then finally, I think Lucas in the 7th or 8th scored his first knockdown of the fight. Although I think it was more of a push, but it was I thought it was more of a push. But hey, one bad knockdown call begets another one. And I think at the time, Molina started gassing and started wilting under the pressure. And in the 10th round, I think it was the 10th round, that Lucas threw an absolutely ridiculous combination on the ropes to drop him again. And at that point, the fight probably should have been called after the 10 because it was just absolutely brutal. And Molina was in the corner bleeding. And I know Joe Goosen was in there trying to fight the doctor, trying to say that he was okay to go, which he probably wasn't. And it was clear that he wasn't, because as soon as he left his stool, Lucas was right on top of him, and just maybe like half a minute later, he was on the canvas. He was on the canvas, pretty much out on his feet. And I was worried because I was like, I didn't like the way that Molina actually just collapsed under that last flurries of blows. But it was just an absolutely ridiculous fight, and probably now I say the first true fight of the year candidate for this year. It's definitely up there now. It's probably the leading candidate now, in terms of fights. Certainly the best fights I've seen this year, which surprisingly, has come later than usual. But hey, at least it came. In terms of performances, like I said, Matthysse, I think probably the key to Mathisse's win was he was definitely using the double jab in the right hand, shooting the right hand to the body, and all that. And like I said, and they both looked huge. Although I think Matthysse was the heavier man, but it looked like Molina was a true blue. It looked like he was a middle. And then and that's why I liked about Lucas is playing. Like he was just chewing the double jab, chewing the right hand, keeping on. He kept pressure on him, and Molina folded. Um, Now, was I alarmed at the knockdowns? Yes, I was very alarmed that Molina was able to dial up knockdowns like that. Excuse me. As for Molina, I seriously, well, again, I think both of them are going to the hospital, but I think Molina really needs to go to the hospital because they actually stuck a microphone underneath him, and I don't know, it was just me, but I'm pretty sure I was hearing slurring. Like he was slurring through that post-fight interview. He took some serious punishment. So like I said, I hope that that he gets thoroughly checked out at the hospital because we don't need another Mago situation they both took a lot. Yeah, because that fight was so wild that I almost forgot that we even had a main event. Keith Thurman versus Julio Diaz. Now I was wondering how this was going to follow up with it, and unfortunately the fight ended early. Um, Very anticlimactic. It was the first fight. I mean, the first 2 rounds pretty much was Keith, being explosive as ever. But of course I was talking over his fight with other people on the forum I post on, and one of them mentioned that it didn't seem that Thurman had, he wasn't really much of a fight on the inside. And in the third round, that actually came about. In the third round, I think Julio actually managed to wobble him on the inside with a left hook, and Julio pretty much was won that round, won that third round. The unfortunate thing though is that Keith with a body shot manages to break a rib, which is which brought an end to the fight. And unfortunately, that's why Garcia called it end to the fight. So, and I thought, I was kind of disappointed because I was thinking to myself that the fight was starting to heat up. It was starting to get a little interesting. But it's a broken rib. What are you gonna do? I mean, you can't really find a broken rib, or you can, but you'll be in a lot of pain. Just taking shots over and over again. So Thurman wins, and Thurman wins, and he was impressively doing it. Except, like I said, he did show some defense lapses, and hopefully, well, I know that Porter has his mandatory with Kell Brook, and pretty much the other welterweight champions are busy, are tied up to fight Maidana and Floyd, and of course Pacquiao, who he can't fight. They're all tied up in their each individual way, but hopefully, like I said, once that whole scene clears in the next, once the whole scene that he gets actual shot. Granted, I know he's an interim champion, and I know all it takes is for it's either for Floyd or whoever to actually not to drop the belt, and Thurman is upgraded to full champion. Don't ask me. I've already explained the belt situation. I'm not really a fan of it, but I mean I guess that's what the outcome is. But Keith again, he's still improving. He's still doing what he's supposed to do. He's getting rid of his gatekeepers in the division, and he's keeping active. So yeah, hopefully that down the line, granted not a Floyd fight, but definitely him versus Sean Porter. That would be an interesting fight to watch. And hopefully they'll stick that on a big card. So yeah, those are my thoughts on the triple header card, and yep, next week is the Floyd Maidana pay-per-view. So till next time, peace.